Good morning, everyone. So just in terms of the area of rural water, I suppose there's four main categories that we consider fall into this area. You're looking at private group water schemes, public group water schemes, and I'll explain the difference between the two of those. Also in that area would be small private supplies that maybe are serving a commercial or public activity like a school or a hotel, for example, and also household wells. So I'll mainly be focusing on my talk today around private group water schemes and public group water schemes. So just looking in terms of maybe for those that don't know what a group water scheme is, you can see up there in the slide, it's a community-owned, community-run organisations that provide potable drinking water to their local members or their shareholders. A lot of these schemes were set up back in the 1960s and 1970s, and you can see there from the pie chart there on your right, I suppose the Irish water, the public water supplies are a large portion of the population served, nearly at 84%. The smaller categories then, the private wells, about 10% of the population are served by private wells. And then the other two categories that are shown there in the green and the red, the 1.8 and 4.4% is around the public schemes, public group water schemes and private group water schemes. So just in terms of breaking those down even further, in terms of the types of group water schemes, people are familiar with the drinking water regulations and regulated schemes and exempted supplies. So I'm not going to go into detail on that, but just the second 2 points in terms of privately sourced group water schemes. So these are schemes that have their own sources, their own catchment areas, treatment, distribution network to consumers' tap. About 380 of those currently regulated schemes that fall into that area, and estimated exempted supplies privately sourced about 800. And then looking at the publicly sourced group water schemes, and these are schemes that get treated water through a bulk meter from Irish Water, but they have their own distribution network to their consumers' tap. So regulated in that category, there's about 350 regulated schemes, and exempted supplies estimated perhaps about 1,000 supplies nationally that are exempted in that category. And some, a large portion of the publicly sourced schemes, they're maybe seen as extensions of the Irish Water Scheme, and in some cases, in many cases, they're known as orphan schemes. There maybe isn't an active structure or an active committee in operational in terms of those schemes. Just looking at the regulated group water schemes, and they vary a lot in size. You have anything from a 15-house scheme right up to our largest regulated privately sourced scheme is about 2,000 houses. But the average around 70 houses, 70 to 100 houses is a large portion of them. You can see from the map there, in terms of sources of these schemes, a large portion, 80%, is groundwater fed, and 20% surface water. So majority of our surface water schemes are, you can see there in the green on the map, Cavan Monaghan region, some to the west, some up the north, and a scattering around the country. And then there's a number of schemes that have mixed supplies, so they have both maybe a groundwater source and also a surface water source as well. And looking at the treatment that's in place in a lot of these schemes, and I'll expand on this on a later slide. We've about 140 of the regulated privately sourced group water schemes that are in design, build, operate contracts, but 70% of the water supplied are in design, build or DBO contracts, as we describe them, and a lot of them are the more complex schemes. The surface water schemes fall into that category. We have seen a lot of work in the area of amalgamation and rationalisation, particularly in the last 20 years of rural group water schemes. So when we say amalgamation, there may be a number of small schemes that have physically joined their networks together, decommissioned maybe plants or sources, and they've joined together to form a bigger scheme, more viable and sustainable into the future. We also have a number of schemes that maybe it wasn't possible to physically connect them, but they formed under a rationalisation structure, generally a co-op or an umbrella structure where they still maybe retain their own networks and treatment plants and sources, but they form maybe an umbrella co-op for operational purposes, and there's a lot of benefits in that area. In terms of governance of the sector and the regulated supplies, a large portion of them are cooperatives. About 70% of the supplies are cooperatives. There's model rules that have been developed for a long number of years through ICOS for the sector, and I suppose a lot of them have gone down that road. There's a small number that are companies limited by guarantee, and a small number then that are trustees. In terms of employment, we've seen a lot of progression in this area, in the sector, particularly over the last 20 years, where they would have started off as voluntary structures, people in the community coming together to get piped water into supply on the ground. But we've seen a lot of employment happening in the sector, whether that be on a full-time basis or part-time basis, in the area of managers, caretakers, administrators. And we have some schemes out there that would have all three of those in place on their scheme and operating on the ground in their community. So just looking at the water quality and a bit of historical information there, I suppose there has been, back in the late 1990s, you can see from the chart on your top right there, you can see the group water schemes on the right-hand side versus the public schemes on the left. So compliance was not great back in the late 1990s in terms of E. coli, fecal E. coli or total coliforms. It wasn't great. You can see we're just about 70%, late 60% of compliance at that point. Following on from that, there was an ECJ case where Ireland failed to comply with the obligations in relation to compliance in respect of total and fecal coliforms. So there was a huge investment from that point forward in the sector, in the rural water sector. At the same time, our organisation, the National Federation, was set up in 1998 as well, and we had a lot of work was done at that point as well. We had the establishment of groups like the National Rural Water Monitoring Committee. We did a comprehensive monitoring programme that was rolled out nationally across the sector at that time. We had county rural water strategic plans that were rolled out across all the local authorities, looking at the needs, the assessment, prioritising what investment was required on these schemes. I suppose many of the schemes back then were just maybe abstracting raw water, or there was little or no treatment, or very basic treatment in place on a lot of the schemes. Hence why compliance wasn't great at that point. So there's been a huge investment in the sector, particularly over the last 20 years, and since the Rural Water Programme, or the Capital Investment Programme, was launched in 1998. I mentioned earlier the design, build, operate, so there was such a large number of schemes to be addressed. We had the ECJ case that happened in 2002. So the whole concept of bundling schemes, bundling rural water schemes, within counties. We have some counties that might have one bundle, we have others that have several bundles. So they bundle schemes together within region for tendering purposes. So they went out to tender with maybe 10, 20 schemes to design, build and operate those plants for 20 years. And we're nearly coming to the end of some of those 20-year contracts now at this point, and ready to move into the next phase of DBOs. So there's a lot of partnership established at that time between the public sectors and the private sector and the group water schemes. You can see down on the left where we are now from the last drinking water report published by the EPA in terms of compliance. We're up there at 96.5%, which is, you know, we've come a long way over that time. So I mentioned the establishment of the National Federation that was set up in 1998, and we were set up as a national representative organisation, and we're at national level and also at local level within county federation structures as well. The schemes around the country affiliate with the group water schemes. We very much work in partnership in delivering the rural water programme. We work closely with the department, with the local authorities, with the rural water sections within local authorities as well. We provide a development service for the members for the schemes in the area of training, advisory, mentoring service. So we have 3 offices nationally there and currently 14 staff. We're a cooperative structure ourselves, and we have a board of directors as well in place. So just looking at the funding there in terms of the investment that I mentioned, if you look from 1998 on the slide there right up to 2022, over $1 billion in that 24 years has been spent on capital investment under the Rural Water Programme. It was an annual programme a number of years ago. Now it's a multi-annual programme that rolls over 3 years. So huge investment has been made in the sector to bring the rural schemes up to sufficient standards so they're producing quality drinking water. The other graph there is in relation to subsidies. So the rural group water schemes apply for operational subsidies for their day-to-day running costs, assistance with the treatment plant costs, insurance, staffing, etc. So there's been 250 million over that 24-year period in operational subsidies to the rural group water schemes as well. Just in terms of, I suppose, where we're at now, in recent years, there was a joint Oireachtas committee on the future funding of domestic water services was established in 2017, and this was looking at the principles of equity of treatment and equivalent financial supports to be applied across the group water scheme sector, group sewage scheme, individual wells, public schemes, and I suppose it was looking at quantifying what additional investment needs would be required to equalise treatment between all sectors. So the Rural Water Working Group, one of the recommendations from that Joint Oireachtas Committee was the establishment of the Rural Water Working Group, and this was set up in 2018, and mainly to conduct a review of the wider investment needs in relation to the rural water sector at that point. In 2022, the Tobin consultants were appointed by the department to carry out a review of the sector, and it covered all areas such as governance, supervision, funding, the wider investment needs relating to rural water. It looked at monitoring of water quality, how deficiencies may be identified and being responded to. And it really was gathering the facts, but also looking at the challenges as it currently stands in the sector. So it's a really good basis, the outputs that has been produced from that work for the working group, for the Rural Water Working Group going forward in their work. So just some of the challenges that would have come out of that and has also been evident in the last couple of years. I suppose water quality, we're still not there fully at compliance. We've also seen a number of parameters maybe that weren't issues in years previous but are coming up, maybe new parameters, manganese, THMs has been causing a problem in recent years, and we're seeing changes in raw water quality maybe that wasn't there before as well. The area of governance and oversight, obviously the Water Services Authority, local authorities play a huge role in administering the capital funding to the sector. The operational funding, supervisory role in that area as well, and resources has been a struggle there in some cases. Looking at legislation, and Donald mentioned some of the new legislation that's in recent years. You've the drinking water regulation, the whole area of water safety planning. Obviously, that's going to be more complex for maybe the larger schemes to address in terms of risk management, risk assessment as well, and the whole area of abstraction. Establishing safe yields, maybe where there's risks of over-abstraction, that's a challenge maybe for the sector as well. Of course, funding, the domestic funding, the subsidies in relation to supplying domestic water, so that whole end, the multi-annual, the capital programme, and maybe non-domestic funding and contributions from non-domestics on the schemes. And personnel as well, we still have a large number of volunteers, but I mentioned earlier there's a great increase in the number of paid staff across that sector, and maybe there would be some challenges in the area of governance. So just in terms of the multi-annual programme or the capital programme that I've mentioned, there's been a major review on this carried out in the last few years. It was launched, the new 3-year programme was launched in January of this year, and that was a major task for the Rural Water Working Group in terms of feeding into the review of that. And we've seen, 3 years, 125 million capital investment in the sector over the next 3 years. So the review of the programme is very welcome. We've 9 measures across it, a lot more detail, expansion with clarity within the framework, which is very welcome. So 9 measures, and very welcomed by the sector. A large number of schemes have made submissions into that, so we'll just await announcements down the road in terms of that funding. Just an area I want to mention, I mentioned the DBO subgroups, and I mentioned the DBO contracts coming to an end, those 20-year contracts, and maybe going into the next phase. So that's something that the Rural Water Working Group have established, a DBO subgroup to look at that area, and that will certainly, I understand, be a priority for that group in the coming years. Just in terms of our strategic plan, I know Donald mentioned the Water Services Policy Statement that was published early in 2024, and we're just in the process of rolling out our new strategic plan for 2025 to 2030, and it'll very much be in line with the objectives of the strategic plan. It'll be outcome-based, it'll be structured in line with that plan, and we plan to have it published later in the year. So just quickly in terms of the 3 main objectives under that and where we see it from a rural water perspective. So looking at availability and reliability, we're looking at full implementation of integrated source protection plans. We've done a huge work in this area, in the area of source protection, and implementing mitigation actions. Looking at reliable structures or sustainable sources in terms of the abstraction legislation, looking at group schemes, assisting group schemes to be prepared and adopted for the impacts of climate change, looking at risk assessments, risk management approach, and we're working on a tool for the sector to assist schemes with that. Reliable service delivered in compliance with the Charter rights and responsibilities for schemes for the sector, and looking at the improved access for water through the installation of water refill stations. And Donald mentioned some of the pilots earlier in his talk, and we were delighted to be involved in that, and they have been very successful in the schemes that they've been rolled out on. The second objective around safety and quality, so you're looking at the continued investment for critical infrastructure, looking at addressing any of those historical water quality issues that are still there, the efficient turnaround of the design, build, operate contracts, improvement of process. We've had 20 years experience in the DBO and the rural water sector, so there's a lot of learnings there. But there's also opportunities for some of the other private schemes that may not have went into DBO bundle, maybe to join future bundles. Water safety planning from catchment to consumer, looking at risk assessment and risk management, assisting the sector with that, and also improvement in the area of operational monitoring systems. Health and safety, I suppose improvements in that area for oversight, governance, and ensuring that personnel on the ground are fully trained. And the final objective around the area of sustainability, future consolidation. We've done a lot of work in the area of amalgamation and rationalisation, but there's certainly more improvements and more opportunities in the sector across the state where we could get more schemes in that area. Further professionalism in the sector through employment of managers, operational and administrative staff. Improvement in governance, oversight on boards. Intake of training. We're constantly developing and revising our training courses for the sector and trying to make the courses more available as well. Greater membership participation from the scheme's members and shareholders on the ground, and also improvements in gender balance on the boards as well, or the board of directors. So just my final slide then in relation to opportunities. I suppose we are a small sector in rural Ireland, as you've seen from the initial slide, but we cover a vast area in terms of distribution network in rural Ireland, looking at raw water sources from complex surface waters to groundwaters. We cover a huge area in land catchment area, and we've great potential to improve on that, engagement with the stakeholders to help ensure compliance at the tap. So looking at developing sustainable and robust schemes, better governance, operational structures, water quality, resilient sources, looking at wider environmental outcomes. So we've been recognised as a sector that is leading as a community group in achieving climate, biodiversity and environmental benefits through actions that can inspire communities at local level. Looking at re-energising the boards, increased level of communication and access to information, and broadening the representation in the sector. And I suppose finally continue to demonstrate the value of the rural water sector to the state. So we have a lot of information available on our website. We're on all social media channels, and we just recently launched, as of last week, a graduate recruitment programme. So a lot of information there for anyone that's interested, and thank you for your attention.